It just disappeared. It's like, okay, that was it for programming. Let me see. It's opening again. And here's kind of like more details on how programming works, right? So computer programming is a way to giving computer instruction, but what they should do next, these instructions are known as code. So you're correct too, right? So programming is, yes, it's giving instruction to the machine, but also the steps, each steps is what we kind of code, right? Okay, step one, I want you to do this, step two, right? Because without that, machine cannot perform that action for you. And computer programmers write code to solve problems or performing tasks. So it is solving problems and performing some tasks repeatedly if you wanted to do that. So the end goal is to create something that could mean anything from a web page or a piece of software or even just kind of a pretty picture. That's why computer programming is often described as a mix between art and science. It's technical and analytical, yet creative at the same time. So it's a combination of a lot of things. You can go back to building that ATM machine, right, or vending machine, or to build this crazy AI-based platform, right, that can recognize your face and stuff like that. So it can go from a very easy problem, which is maybe a calculator, to, like I said, going into whole holographic kind of thing, right? So these are all problems that a human trying to solve with the help of computer, right? And the only way we can give this instruction is through these languages. Now, these are kind of all of the programming languages that you see out there, right? Java is one of those ones. JavaScript, Python. I mean, you're probably not gonna care about most of those, right? So I'm not sure. But Java is a computer programming language. It enables programmers to write computer instruction using English-based commands instead of having to write in numeric codes. It's also known as a high-level language because it can be read and written easily by human. Easily word, I will take that off, but it can be written by humans for sure, right? So you have a problem. This is your Java code, right? And this is what a machine code is, right? Because if we were to write 1001, because ultimately that's what machine understands. We have not gone beyond that. We just knew how to extend that. That's all. Like add more probability. Like that's what we have done. So think of one thing. How many message can a computer store with just one digit? Like it can be either one or zero. Can you repeat? How many messages that a computer can store in the memory if it can only choose between 1 and 0? How's your switch at home? How's your lights works? Electricity works, right? So each electricity bulb is pretty much zeros and ones, right? If it's a 0, maybe it's off. If it's at 1, it's on. But now let's add it, right? Let's say now software engineering, and as 18 months pass by, we added more memories, right? More RAMs into your computer. So now we can store 2 digits, right? 1, 0. How many messages can I have on that light? So I can have combination of 1, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, right? Right? So 0, 0, 4 messages. Now your lights can be maybe maybe some sort of user experience where if he's at step 1, right? It could be green. Step 2 if it's right. So now think of like billions of numbers. How many combination can it store? But fundamentally nothing has changed. We just figure out a way to add more numbers into our machines, right? But they're all stored between 1 and 0. So you can store a variable called, let's say, my name, right, Mohammed, into the computer, right? It just probably used a very long string of 10001, like some random stuff, right? But so under the hood, that still's the same way. Like it works the same way and ultimately solves the problem for you, okay? So this human instruction is your programming language, right? And that could be any of those languages, and that's fine. Um, then comes, okay, well, what is Java? right? Well, we talked about it. Java is again a programming language that a human can understand, right? So Java is a programming language that produces software for multiple platforms. When a programmer writes a Java application, the compiled code, known as bytecode, runs on most operating systems, including Windows, Linux, and Mac operating system. Java derives much of the syntaxes from C and C++ programming. So if you go one layer down, kind of like a low level language, right? That's C, C++. So you have to write more code to do the same thing. So what they did is they built another software called Java, which you can kind of do less, right, to do the same thing. But you add another layer of communication as you keep building this stuff up, right? Um, but it's gonna get a little bit slower. So had we wrote the code in C, C++ is closer to the machine, whereas Java is a little bit far from the machine. But now think of things like Python or JavaScript, right? They're a little bit farther from even Java, right? They're very high level language. So when we are, if you go to like a lot of the Googles and Facebooks, right, all of this core stuff are probably backend stuff are probably C, C++, because they're still the C++ is still the fastest language in that regards because you can still write it. I mean, we can go back to zeros and one. That would be the fastest language, right? But C, C++ are probably heavily used. Um, all right. So now you have a source code, which is your code. This is something you have written, right? What happens is source code gets compiled into bytecode, right? And then bytecode kind of getting ready. It's getting prepped for so the machine code again, right? And then when you downloaded Java over the weekend, right, it installs something called JVM on every machine, right? So JVM is a Java virtual machine that kind of takes that bytecode, understands the bytecode, and spits out a machine code, right? And then finally, machine understands what the instruction you gave. Does that make sense? Right. So this part, you don't really have to go crazy about it. No one's gonna ask you about it, but you need to understand what you're writing and how it's gonna get compiled, right? So all we are going to be doing is here. As soon as you save it, automatically does the compile. When you run it, it will take the compiled code and convert it into machine code. But you don't see any of those stuff. This is just for understanding purpose. All right. Is it getting technical? Or are you guys okay? You haven't write any code. I don't want to scare anyone off, right? It's very easy stuff. It's just you have to understand them. You have to invest some time, right? Don't take it lightly. This is an engineering course, end of the day, right? So it doesn't mean you have to be a math genius or physics genius, but you have to still focus and go home. If you think you're a little weak, watch some YouTube videos now because you kind of have some understanding. Don't watch it too far ahead, but at least the things we went over, maybe listen from another perspective, right? It could give you a little bit more details. So that's okay. Just kind of like don't go ahead of me. Otherwise, you're gonna be a little bit lost, right? But if you kind of go home now and try to understand what he's programming, things are gonna make sense a little bit better. All right. Um, so that's that. Now let's start maybe write our first application. So open your Intallij, and then I'm opening it from here. Um, you create a project. So when you create a new project, make sure to select Java and make sure your SDK is pointing it to this. Um, so that so before we open IntelliJ, a lot of you guys asking where are we using IntelliJ over Eclipse, right? This is just an editor. It doesn't change your code, right? It's like writing your final essay or some sort of documents, right? So you're using either Google Doc or Microsoft Word. It's your preference, right? If you like to use Google Doc or Notepad, it's totally up to you. That's what we are using. You can write English paragraph in any of those platform, right? Um, so same thing with writing code. It's your preference of which platform you want to use. But since we are in the same class, I would prefer we use the same tool because this is the one I have expertise on. Well, not expertise. I know some how to use it. So uh, honestly, you're not going to use 95% of the future, right? So don't stress too much about it. You don't know something about the IDE. This is called IDE. It's a little bit um, more compact with development kit installed in there. How do I explain that? So I guess integrated development environment. It's not just an editor like Notepad or something like that, right? It's powerful enough to compile it for you. It's powerful enough to obviously save it, consume any type of dependencies and stuff like that when we go into Selenium, more advanced stuff, right? So it's very powerful. And there's two versions, community versions and professional version. I still don't know what are the difference between those, so just get the free one, which is the community version, right? So just get the community version, and it should be fine with that. Again, IDE does not matter. If you go to a company, they will not care what you're using, right? Either Eclipse or IDE, but most likely, once you use this, you're gonna like this. I used to use Eclipse for Java, but then switch over to this a couple of years ago. So you just kind of make sure you're selecting Java. We're going to get to Maven and stuff later, but right now we are going to do Java. Click on Next, right? And then click on Next, and then you name the project something, right? So we'll say, I don't know, Java demo. Right? And then you'll say open a new window. You see, my preference is dark. It's because if you go to preference here, and my background is dark, you can either choose the theme darkula or light, right? So whatever your eye feels better, that's what you can choose. Once you do this, so it's like creating a folder, right? Think of like if you created a folder in your documents or in your desktop, and this is what we have done. So you can choose any workspace. I usually like to create a folder called workspace inside of documents, and any type of Java project, I dump it there, right? So then this is serious stuff, right? And then what we want to do is, again, it's like now we have something called workspace, and inside of a workspace, we have, let's say, pictures, right? But what do you mean by pictures? We need to actually have sub-modules to describe, oh, this is the wedding pictures, this is the kids picture, this is the trip picture, right? So you label them with something else. So we need to create something called package, right? And we can create this package inside of something called SRC. And we'll create this package called basics, right? So once we get to the right click on SRC, and just do new, and then click on package. Okay. Let me make this a little bigger.
Every time I right click,
okay. If you're individually, if you're having issue, just hold on. We'll do it after the class, okay? And then on the basics, well, I have the folder, but I don't have the Java code, right? So we need to have a file. What is the extension of the file called Excel? XLX, right? What is the extension of PDF? PDF, okay. So what I'm trying to get to is that you see how those have extension?
Yeah.
So when your computer gets them, they understand what type of program they are, right?
Yeah.
This is an Excel type of program, so we need to have a Java extension folder, right? So we need to have a Java file. So when your computer gets a file, it says, no, this is not a PDF. This is not an Intallij. This is a Java. Let's send it to JVM. Does that make sense? So we need to do that. So we need to first create something called Java class. We call them class, all right? A lot of languages, they call them file, but we call them class, all right? We click on Java class and make sure the kind, you see what it says kind here? It's defaulted to class, and we can just call it, hello world, right? So the reason we're doing hello world, they say it's kind of a curse if you don't start your programming with this. So I want to make sure that no one blames me after that. So we do this, and it creates this curly braces thing. So your scope of writing the code, you can only write code between this opening curly brace and this closing curly braces, okay? And at this point, all you need to understand, you see how package called basics? It's telling that, hey, this file, hey guys, we can do that after, like once I'm done. If you're having issue creating this, don't worry about it. You have a video for this. You don't have to create it now. It doesn't matter. Like it's more of if you understand what's going on. So you have the package, and then followed by you have something called class name. We named our classes with. We started with what? The first letter being uppercase, right? The first word, first letter of the first word is uppercase, and then every new word is introduced within that class name, right, or file name, would be the first letter would be uppercase. So this is called Pascal casing, okay? But what we need to understand, the class names should start with uppercase and followed by every new word's first letter should be uppercase, okay? And your package's name starts with lowercase, and every new word introduced should be uppercase. I mean, the first letter of that new word should be uppercase. So, however, class name should start with uppercase, and then it kind of stays the same. The package name should start with lowercase. These are the two things you need to understand, right? So we're going to go over this definition later, but this is called camel casing, and this is called Pascal casing, okay? All right, so far, we know that all of our Java code has to stay within the scope of these two curly braces. So I don't want to see you writing code outside here and say, hey, it's not working, because it's not supposed to work, right? So we don't write anything outside that parent curly braces. Where we write our code, still not here. We don't write our code saying, hey, run this program. What we have to do is, so we have a class. We have to have something called method, and we're going to spend a couple of days on methods. But for now, all you have to understand is method is something where you execute Java code, okay? So, and this definition will continue to change as we learn more about methods. And don't worry about the keyword public. Don't worry about the keyword static. Also, don't worry about void. Don't worry about any of those things, right? In 2 weeks, you're going to learn all of that, right? But we have to take it one step at a time. This is like learning how to put puzzles together. If I try to explain you everything right now, you're not going to come from tomorrow, right? So we're going to take one step at a time, right? I'm going to use the method that's been working for past students. So you got to be patient. If you know a little bit, just kind of bear with me, all right? And because majority students, they need to be learned from the beginning. So if you have some experience, don't lose patience. Eventually, it's going to get challenging for you, right? And it could be a review for you, or you can help other students, along the way. So what we have is something called main method. So if you wanted to run a Java code, your code has to reside within the main method, right? I'm going to quiz you on this next class, because you have to understand what is the difference between package and class, right? Class is where your method resides, and method inside of a main method is where your code that wants to get executed, Java code that will get executed, right? So the very first code that we want to run is it's just for our program to tell us, on every time we run our program, it should tell us hello world. That's it. It should just tell you hello world. Make sense? Okay. How many of you guys did the prep course? So you got some idea of what's going on, right? So that's good. Excellent. Um, so every time you kind of see this, and now if you can run it many different ways, right? We can run it by right click on this method and hit the run button. And since we don't have any applications, so think of something like we don't have a web application to test this, right? But how would you test your program? We're going to be using this output console. So this is called console, right? So this is where we're going to see what our program's supposed to do, right? So a lot of time we are going to say system.out.println, right? So, but in if there was a web application, let's say there's a front end developer who has HTML, you know how we have the darksky.com, they will just simply connect to this, right? To their code, and we will kind of say maybe something like this, button dot display. So instead of system out println, hey, every time you click on the button, it's going to say hello world, something like that. Just to kind of give you understanding of how we connect the front end code to back end code. But since we don't have that, and we shouldn't have that, we should be testing our own code individually. We're going to be using kind of like a scaffolding, right? Like this is kind of a temporary solution to see our output. But whatever we see here, you can assure that that's what's going to show on the front end. If someone were to have an application where they click on a button and it tells them hello world. Make sense? All right. Any questions so far? So do we understand, okay, we have to create a project, then we have to create a package, but not every time. So package is only if all your basic stuff, just put it under here, right? When we get into like, let's say objects, right? Create a new package and then put all your object classes there. Organize it however you want it. I'm not going to kind of monitor you on how you organizing your folders, right? But try to understand that you don't have to create a package for each class, then it defeats the purpose, right? You should group them and then have one package for them, right? Again, it's kind of like going back to the picture analogy. Like if you have a folder called pictures, right, and if you create package for each picture, this doesn't make sense. But if you say, hey, London trip, LA trip, right, now you're kind of breaking them into different type of pictures from a different visits. So you have to group them and then you have to kind of go from there. All right. So we have the project, we have the package, followed by a class, and then finally you have a main method, and then you have the code that you want to print to console, right? And this is a data type called string, and we're gonna get there in a little bit, right? Maybe next class. But for now, I want to show you some shortcuts to building this out, right? And you see how I do double slashes? That means it's comments, right? If you've done the prep course, you should know that. Double slashes means this is being ignored by the compiler. So Java ignores it. It's just for your note purpose. You're kind of keeping some notes. So, and here you can kind of just, if your code is very complex, you can write what your code is doing. It shouldn't be. I tell my developers, your code should not have comments. It should be descriptive enough to explain what's happening, right? So your code should look like someone is reading an English language. So that's what we're gonna get to, right? When we saw that unit test, you saw how it's kind of reading. You don't have to write another comment top of it because the code itself is so descriptive that you can tell what's happening, right? And we're gonna have to get to that point at some point. All right, shortcut for so if you start typing PSVM, so these are the stuff that you get with Intallij or other IDE, integrated development environment. Not editor cannot probably just provide you that. So then you do that, right? So you don't have to write out the whole thing. So just do PSVM.
Which paper? After PSV. Which paper?
Okay, let me see. I forgot. I just know how the keyboard works. So we'll say PSVM, and then you do command. Oh, it's not command. See, you messed up my flow. I don't know now. It just kind of gives you an option. So you see, when I started typing, you start to see that. So when you do the shortcut and you do the PSVM, and it will get it. And then we have another shortcut. Right? So if you, because we are always going to be printing stuff, right? Printing stuff to the output. Oh, now we want to see what the output of an action. So every time you want to do this, you will do something like this. South. You see how you say south? And then just select the first one, and it will give you that, right? And then we can type hello world.
Why did you write as the shortcut word?
South. SOUT. If you're a Windows user, I'm not sure. What are the? I think it's same. It works. I was just kidding.
For public static word, you can also type main and
Main also does it, right? Okay. Yeah. So yeah, there's like a bunch of shortcuts out there. Don't get too focused on shortcuts, right? Because it's not super important. Yeah, because we're never gonna use main. When we get into real-time application, we don't use main at all. But this is something that we're gonna learn how to code with for now. Okay, let's move on to the next topic. Well, this is kind of where we have to start, right? Um, the very first thing we want to learn is something called variables, right? So in programming, we use a variable to store data temporarily in computer memory. So we store data somewhere and give the memory a location and name. Therefore, we can access the data from a given location in future, right? For example, we can use box analogy where we can store different products in individual box and label them with name so it's easier to access them later when it's needed. Make sense? So think of, yeah, again, I mean, this is kind of how they're explaining it, is every time um, you create a variable, that means you're storing something in your computer, and that computer could be anything like your server or whatever may be the case. And if you want to access that value, right, then you can always kind of call that variable and get it. Like think of something like your age, right? You may not just remember which age are you referring to, right? So you can, instead of calling the value, you can always just call age, and based on the current day, it will continue to update your age, right? So you don't have to keep track of your own age. The program will do that for you, right? But for us to do this, we have to first part is the data type, right? What type of data type are we? And we're going to get to data type in a little bit. And then the second part is your variable name. And then an assignment operator, right? So if we are saying this will be the data type, this will be the variable name, and this will be the value that's going to represent age, right? So, and then we take this 20 and we store it into the computer's memory. Does that make sense? Right? And every time we run it, it will kind of bring it back out, and if you call age, and it will work for you. So let's do this one, and then we'll get to data type in a little bit. So I'm going to get rid of this stuff. So I'm going to keep, this is kind of a sandbox. So if you're going to need some of those code, you're going to have to watch the video a little bit and rewind and pause, and that's the only thing. So int. So think of int as like a whole number, right? And we're just focusing on age as a whole number, right? So int age followed by assignment operator, and then we say 20, right? So let's say if I run this code, What can I expect to see here? Raise your hand. I shouldn't see anything, right? Anybody else? If I run this code, what would happen? Why not?
There's no pretty command.
Sorry?
There's no command to display there's a pretty command to display
There is no command to display what?
display this age or display something we put in that pretty command.
I know what you're saying. I want you to explain it in a way I understand right away. Okay, you're good, but someone else can explain why
There's
can.
no print statement.
And what does a print statement do for you?
It prints whatever you want to print, like the variable,
Right. It looks for a variable and it looks for the data inside of the variable, and that's the value that prints out to console. I want you to start explaining using the keywords like console, output, right? Terminologies. I need you to start. You're good, but that explanation is not good enough for me, right? I need you to use the terminologies so that you're getting used to having conversation, right? You're not gonna go to a developer and say, or your colleague say, hey, no, this is the thing that's gonna print, right? No, you need to say, hey, this is not printing in console. Can you help me resolve this issue? Does that make sense? All right. So the way we can print is what? South. And then we say age. So now if I run my code, what would happen?
The number.
Right? We'll just print the number. Okay, but when you print 20, I understand, but what the hell this thing is, right? So you need to be a little bit more descriptive, even when you're printing it. So let's try this thing out, see if it works. So we say my age is 20. Does that make sense? So I have two variables and I added them both together. But we added a string value with integer value, right? That this addition is different than the traditional addition, right? We're not really adding in an increment where we're just kind of combining, concatenating. So it's more of a concatenate. It's not an addition. It's actually concatenating two values together to mean something. But I'm still not happy with the message. It still looks crappy. What do you mean my age? Who's my? Who's representing my, right? But what if we did this? Muhammad age is 20. Well, it still sucks, right? Because who's Muhammad, right? Since there's a lot of Muhammad, that's not the main point. It's like, but how do I update it? How do I update it, right? So every time I update this name, I want this to be a little bit more dynamic, right? Just like the age, because age could be representing anything, right? And I don't have to update anything on my code, and it will just print it. So if I change age tomorrow, let's say your birthday happened, and day after that you ran this code, it should say my age is 21, right? So Muhammad age is 21. So I didn't have to do anything. The program automatically knows when my date. I mean, you guys will figure this out. We'll build these applications where you would have to build your age calculator and all that using the date, so it can read the current your birthday, and if it reaches your birthday, it should increment one. So we'll learn how to do all of those, but we got to do baby stuff now, right? So now I would like to store another value called string name equals to right, and instead of doing this, right, what if I just say name plus age, right? Things are getting a little bit better now. So let's assume we are getting this data from the front end, and our job is to do all of the computations. Maybe we are getting this from a client. When I say client, what do I mean? A little bit more specific. Yes, client is a user, but in this context of our conversation, what's a client? This is not the same client from a product management stage. This is a different kind. This is from a programming standpoint. When I say clients, what do I mean? Come on, guys. We went over it like an hour ago. What is it? Yes, but which? But
Safari.
yes, the softwares, right? So it could be the phone, it could be anything. So when I say I'm getting the users from data from the clients, I don't care about the user, and we understand that, right? But in this context, when you have an engineering context, it's actually we are referring clients is those devices that resides on the front end, right? So one of the conversation you're gonna happen in a meeting, hey, client is sending me wrong data, right? No one's talking about the users. It's more like, hey, browsers or iOS app or Android app is sending me wrong data. Yes, they're all essentially translating to user, but in this context, I want you to kind of say, hey, browser is sending me wrong data. So these data could be getting from the browser itself, right? Um, all right, so now that we have this, if I run this code, what would happen?
Name and page printed together.
Okay, good.
We don't have space.
So we have Mohammed, but the Muntakim and you see how many bugs can happen so many different places. So we have to be very careful. So we need to add some space between that. So let's add another variable, right? So we can say plus, and then just add the space here. Space is a character, right? The computer sees space as a character. And then when we added that space now, Mohammed Muntakim 21, right? You get the point, right? We can be as descriptive as we can, but the whole point is right now we are just concatenating this. What I want to do for class work today, because I want everyone to be able to run their program today, right? Before you go home. So what I want you to focus on is you when you deal with numbers, just use the int for now. All right, we're gonna learn more maybe the next class. When you're dealing with like data, like some sort of a string, right? Characters. I want you to use double quote on opening double quote, closing, and put whatever junk you want to put inside of that. What I want you to do for classwork, you add another variable called address, right? And print me a message that says, Mohammed with age lives in this street, something like that, right? So your printout message should look like this. And but it's your name, so that's that's what it is. So let's start working on this, and then Deepak and I can kind of verify this for you guys. Mohammed. Okay. With 32 years old. Lives in. What's up?
Address must be separate.
Yeah, exactly how I'm printing it here. I want to see exactly how this is, but for address, I want a variable. We want to make it in a way anyone can use it, right? So,
Yeah,
so
but, we can use a string or we can separate string and integer. I mean, 347.
no, this is part of a string,
Okay.
right? So when I print your code, I should see your name, whatever your age is, and your address. Okay, and address can be inside of a string. The entire address, 347, that should be inside of a string. So it's not integer values. Okay, so this whole thing you can put it inside of your address, and that's okay if you make a mistake. That's You're stuck? All right. All right. Let me see 1 second. And for homework, to be honest with you, is just review. I want you to review the testing types, the architecture one more time, and we're gonna have a quiz and play around with this code base. That will be your homework. And the next homework is gonna be a lot of work for you to do a lot of variables, so you can work on Saturdays as well. Um, let me start with her, and then let me see if any. Deepak, if any questions from online, just what is that?
I never right clicked and I never so basics was how did you do that?
No, there's something else. The way you do right click on, are you new to Mac? So you do two fingers, right? And then the right finger is where you open up that. You see how I have two fingers? And then I'm going to put on the right one, right? That becomes kind of your right click. Like if you remember the traditional mouse, right? And then you do it. Then you do basics and you do the same thing and create. If you're done online, please share it with Deepak. You created a project. You know what you did? You created a class.